Hello, this is Jack Bobo, and I am the CEO of Futurity, a food foresight company, but also the author of Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices. And I am delighted to be here in this Facebook Live event with Build Up Dietitians. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes, and so if people would take the opportunity to put any questions you might have in the chat, that would be great. Also, if you could introduce yourself, tell me where you're listening in from, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to give us a couple of minutes here to get everything started. So again, we'll be started here soon talking about why smart people make bad food choices. And I am going to start off by saying that I am in Washington, D.C., or rather in Potomac, Maryland, right outside of D.C. And again, going to be talking about my book, Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices. And just delighted to be able to speak to an audience of registered dietitian, nutritionists. It's really a pleasure to be able to speak to all of you. I am not a dietitian and I am not a medical doctor, but I am somebody who has been thinking very hard about our food system. And so we are just about ready to get started. So it is noon. Please, again, think about putting into the chat where you're from, who you are, and maybe where you work. That would be wonderful. I'd love to know who's listening in at the moment. So, again, my name is Jack Bobo. I am the author of Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices. I'm also the CEO of Futurity, a food foresight company. I work with big food brands, food tech startups to help them understand what does the future of food look like, where are consumer trends and attitudes going, and how do organizations get ahead of trends so they don't get run over by them. And today, though, I'm talking about my book, Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices. And I thought I would just begin, though, by telling you, how did I end up writing such a book? I'm a food policy wonk. I spent 13 years working for the U.S. Department of State doing global food policy. For the last 2.5 years, I've been working as a consultant on the future of food. And one thing struck me. I spent a lot of time thinking about consumer psychology, consumer trends. And I was really sort of puzzled by the situation of, in many ways, we have never in the history of the planet known more about health and nutrition, and yet we have never been so obese. We've never had access to more healthy and nutritious food in the grocery store, and yet somehow we've never been more obese. It's wonderful to see people dropping comments and where they're from. It's great to see everybody. It's also good to see some people that I know who are listening in. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what's in the book, and then I'm going to open it up, and I would love to get your questions. So please think about asking questions right now. So as you know better than I, 42% of all Americans are obese, 75% are overweight or obese. And if we don't find a way of doing something about it, we'll be at 50% obesity by 2030. And so in the book, it's divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I look at sort of the psychology of our food choices. How do things like the halo effect and decision fatigue and all of these confirmation bias somehow guide us to make choices that may not be in our long-term interest? And in the second part of the book, it's really all about the environment and how is our environment driving bad choices today. And it's really in the second part that I think may be of greatest interest to many listening in, because it may be a little different than what you do every day. And for me, I was just fascinated. How did we get here? How did we get to this point? And we often think of America as being a place where people are particularly overweight. But if we went back to 1970, what you would find is the obesity rates in the United States were actually lower than in many parts of Europe. Obviously, things are dramatically different today. But I mean, it's really just been in the last 50 years that we've had this huge divergence from the rest of the world. Back in 1970, practically no country on the planet had an obesity rate above 15%. Now, almost every country on the planet has obesity rates above 15%, and they're all just moving in the wrong direction. And so, this is not just a U.S. problem. The U.S. is just kind of a leading indicator of a global problem. And so I really wanted to understand, as I mentioned, how did we get here? And so as I began to do research, there's some just really fascinating stories that I ran across. So I wondered, how did we get the supersized food craze? And in many ways, it all goes back to the mad genius of one man, David Wallerstein, back in the 1960s. And if you don't know his story, it's just fascinating. He was a marketing guy working for a chain of movie theaters, and his job was to figure out how to get people to buy more popcorn and things at the concession stand. And he tried everything from a marketing perspective, and he could not get people to go back for a second bag. And it finally dawned on him, what if the reason people won't get a second bag of popcorn is because they're embarrassed? They want the bag, but they don't want to look gluttonous if they were to go back and eat a second bag. And so that's when it struck him, what if I offered a larger size? And of course, the jumbo size popcorn was born. And David went on to work for McDonald's. And when he got there, he told Ray Kroc the same thing. He's like, you got to offer larger sizes. And Ray Kroc said, nah, if we need a larger size, people just, or more French fries, people just go back for a second bag. Well, of course, we know that that's not how the mind works. And it wasn't until 1972 that he finally convinced Ray to offer a large size French fry. And of course, the rest is history. But there are other really fascinating stories as well. We're all familiar with 7-Eleven and the Big Gulp. But back in the 70s, 7-Eleven was a struggling chain of convenience stores. And it wasn't until 1978 or 1976 when a salesman for Coca-Cola came in to talk to the regional manager for Southern California and to try to convince him to buy this box of large cups that he had. And the guy looked at him, he's like, that's a 32-ounce cup. Nobody can drink 32 ounces. Our biggest cup is only like 20 ounces. And the guy from Coca-Cola said, look, I will give you the cups. Just try them out. And so the guy sent them to Orange County, to his largest sales for soda, and he had 500 cups. And a week later, the guy at the store, the manager, called back and said, hey, can you send me more cups? Because they all sold out. And of course, that was the birth of the Big Gulp. It just happened to be this coincidence that they were offered at 7-Eleven first. But so much of what we think of as the norm today hasn't been around that long. I mean, when we think about McDonald's, a soda in McDonald's in 1955 was only 6 or 7 ounces. And Burger King was competing with them and selling Pepsi, and so they offered the extra large size of 12 ounces in their stores. And it's a little bit hard for us to understand that most consumers can't even imagine what an adult serving of food looked like back in 1955. When you look at the size of a hamburger and the small French fry and the 7-ounce soda, that was an adult serving, and people just can't wrap their minds around what that's like today. And so these are the kinds of stories. I wanted to understand how we got here in terms of the dietary guidelines, which of course were intended to help make people healthier, and the focus in the early 80s on dietary fat. Well, what happened is that food companies responded really in the way you would hope that they would. They started offering low-fat versions of the foods that we're all familiar with, and consumers started buying them. But of course, that's where the economics ties to the first part of the book in terms of psychology, and the health halo effect said, look, if one cookie is good for me, then an entire bag must be great. And so the psychology connected to that marketing really led people to overconsume products that were actually intended to make them healthier. And that's one of the challenges that we have today is, one, that people will overconsume products that they think have a health halo, but two, when you make a product healthier, many times people will like it less. So if you provide a low-sodium can of soup, one of the things Campbell's did, people just reported that they didn't like it as much. And what's interesting is that that's different than the psychology, because in a blind taste test, they may not actually be able to notice the difference between the low-sodium version and the traditional version. But if they think that it has low sodium, they expect to like it less, and they actually enjoy it less. I mean, if you test their enjoyment of the product. And so psychology is so intimately connected to the decisions that people are making. And that's one of the things that I'm then grappling with in the book. How can we take what we know about behavioral science and not just focus on individual behavior change, but what could we do to reshape our entire food environment so that instead of delivering unhealthy outcomes as the default, we could begin to deliver healthy outcomes without people really being able to explain why they're losing weight. And so, you think about in 1960, nobody knew anything about health and nutrition, but for some reason they weren't obese. Now, obviously, our food environment has changed, our culture has changed, our activity has all changed, but it's not information that they had. And, people in the past didn't have more willpower than people today. I mean, things that you all are very familiar with. It's that their food environment was different, from plate sizes to snacking patterns to all of these things. And so in the last part of the book, I look around for ideas that are out there that show what we could be doing differently. And one of the chapters talks about a program in the UK where grocery stores redesigned the grocery store to encourage purchases of fruits and vegetables. And they were able to increase fruit and vegetable consumption by 13% year over year simply by redesigning the grocery store. And none of the customers know that anything changed. They just bought more fruits and vegetables. And so those are the kinds of things that can be done. Changing the wording of items on the menu can make products more appealing. Panera did that with their what was low-fat black bean soup that they changed to Cuban black bean soup. And of course, sales took off because one sounds exotic and interesting and tasty, and the other sounds like it's going to be bland and, I'm suffering because I have to eat it. So those are some of the things I talk about in the book. I'm going to take a moment here and kind of scroll through and see if there are any questions in the chat. I hope that there will be some, and I will go on and talk a little bit more about the book, though, if I don't see any questions right now. Let's see. Yeah, I noticed somebody talking about, the differences between the United States and Europe. And, I think that, that's something that's obvious for anybody who's traveled, but things are changing, even in places like France. Obesity rates are on the rise dramatically. They're just, 10 or 15 years behind where things are in the United States. One of the questions is, what is the influence of value in purchase? Some foods are more economical in large sizes at the grocery store. In some ways, there are two questions. One is, just value in general, because that's part of what happens when we go to restaurants. The more food they give us, the more value we perceive from that experience. And so I'll talk a little bit about that first. And so, in the book, I give the example of Cheesecake Factory. And a few years ago, I went to the Cheesecake Factory because I wanted to teach my children about portion control and portion sizes. And it's obviously a restaurant chain that's known for giving people lots of food, or a large portion. And when I went into the restaurant, I ordered the steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans. And when the plate arrived, I have to say I was a little disappointed because it just didn't look like that much food. And of course, I wanted to teach my kids about huge portions and why we shouldn't eat all of it. And it just didn't look that big. And so unlike most people, I took a 9-inch plate out of my wife's purse and I replated the food. And you can imagine my kids were a little embarrassed at this point. But what I found when I replated the food is that it was actually 2 adult servings of food, which, it confused me because when I looked at it on the original plate, I felt confident I could eat the entire plate of food, no problem. But when I replated it, it was obvious it was 2 adult servings of food. And so again, I reached in my wife's purse, and this time I took out a tape measure and I measured the plate. And the plate was 15 inches wide and 12 inches deep. It's this enormous plate. So it didn't look like all that much food on such a big plate. But of course, it was 2 adult servings of food. And so getting, if you eat 2 meals for the price of 1, that's not particularly good value. If you get 2 meals and you take one of them home, that's fantastic value. And so we need to find a way of one, getting people to recognize that if you eat more than you need, then you're wasting money, even if it's only 10 cents, 25 cents, or $1 more. Eating the right amount of food. Being able to take food home, though, isn't enough in and of itself. I mean, we can always say, oh, you should, cut your food in half and leave part of it. But the psychology of our brain is still working against us, because if you leave half the food on your plate, your brain thinks, I didn't finish eating. And so you're going to be hungry sooner than if you never saw that food at all. And you're also not sending signals to your stomach that it's time to start burning calories. So just saving the food's not enough. And that's why we need behavioral changes in our food environment. So wouldn't it be great if you could go to the Cheesecake Factory and you would ask them for the to-go bag before you took your first bite? And so they'd actually bring you half the food in a bag. And so then you could clean your plate, you'd feel good about it, and you wouldn't have to even see the other food. Now, if you want to dig in and eat a little bit more, you can, but most of us won't do that. And so trying to separate what does value mean, I think, is really important. So we need to find ways of changing that. Now, value in terms of the grocery store, I think that, having serving sizes is important. One of the changes in the facts panel is that, they tried to make the portion sizes more realistic. So if you get a thing of ice cream, it used to be 4 servings for that, half pint of ice cream, and now it's 3. I'm not sure if, that's more realistic how most people eat, but some people will now look at that and think, oh, this is 3 servings. And so they may eat more. And so, we've got these trade-offs between being realistic to a consumer's pattern of eating and actually encouraging overconsumption. And so those are 2 tensions that exist. So I'm going to, again, go back and take a quick look at some of the other questions that are coming in. Yeah, so the comment about the pouring 1% milk into a whole milk container to change, there's also just how much we consume. If your kids like juice, but you don't want them to drink too much, by serving it in a tall, skinny glass, people will tend to consume less than if it's in a short, wide glass. This is something that restaurants and other things can do as well. That we pour more into a small wide glass than we do into a tall skinny glass. So using our understanding of sort of trying to judge, we're not very good at judging volume, and you can use that to our advantage. Let's see what other questions we have. Yeah, I think everybody who comes to the U.S. is shocked about the food sizes, and again, that's part of what we need to change that culture, to either make it easier for people to take food home or to make it so that restaurants are rewarded for giving us reasonable portions of food. And that's something we need to do as a society. It's very hard for people to do that on their own. Somebody mentioned that all their plates are 6 to 10 inches. In 1960, the average dinner plate was 7 to 9 inches. Today, it's 12 or more. And I just mentioned, this 15-inch plate from the Cheesecake Factory. A 9-inch plate today is like it's a salad plate, for many people's sets. And so it's good to do that at home. The problem is if you go to restaurants and you keep seeing these 12 and 13-inch plates, our brain doesn't believe the 9-inch plate is a realistic portion. And so that's why we need them to line up. It's important not just what happens in our home, and that's critically important, but it would be even better if it was reinforced every time you go to a restaurant. Let's see, taking a quick look. Yeah, and I should mention that we will be giving away a free copy of my book to one of the listeners here today. Really appreciate people taking the time to spend a little bit of their afternoon here with me. I'm delighted to be able to give out a copy of the book. And I also want to mention that, I would love to engage with people in this community who have ideas and tips for me. Please shoot me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well, but it's jack@futurityfood.com. That's Futurity, F-U-T-U-R-I-T-Y, food.com. Futurity, it sounds like a made-up word, but it's not. And, if you have great tips for behavior changes, please, please, please send them my way. If you have ideas that, we could help to try to scale, that's what's really exciting to me is how do we take good ideas and make them available to everybody. I'm going to put my contact information in there. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. If you are on LinkedIn, please feel free to connect to me. I will accept all of the invitations. I'm pretty active on Twitter at Jack_A_Bobo. Please connect. I will connect with you as well. Trying to get going on Facebook and Instagram. All of you are probably much more proficient in those areas. But so much of what we're working on needs to reach the public in general. I spend far too much of my time talking to other people who are already thinking the same way I do, and I need to reach a broader audience. And so let me give you a few more examples. We still have a little bit of time. So one chapter in my book is devoted to Google. Now, many of you probably don't think of Google and food when you're thinking at the same time, but Google has actually done an incredible amount of work on behavioral science. And it's really interesting because, when they first started, they were one of the first companies in Silicon Valley to offer free food to all of their employees. And they were offering like Michelin star restaurant quality food, and you could get all you wanted. It was available 24/7. And so it took only a couple of years for them to realize that people were gaining like 15 pounds the first year that they were working at Google. And so they hired this gentleman, Michael Bacher, to come and work for them. And he had worked in some of the biggest hotel chains in the world, setting up amazing restaurants everywhere in those hotels. And so he came to Google, and part of what he wanted to do is to help make the food healthier and more nutritious. And so he started changing the menus and working with the chefs in order to make the food more nutritious. But they also saw that people weren't choosing the nutritious options. And so that's when he really started working with the customer insights group at Yale to try to figure out how to use behavioral science in order to encourage people to eat the healthier options. And so some of the things that they did are pretty straightforward. Like with the sodas, they still made soda freely available, but they put it in the lower refrigerator behind frosted glass, and then the spa water and other things were easily accessible. So they made it a little bit more complicated to reach it, and so it wasn't front and center of mind. They were known for giving away M&Ms and all sorts of candy. They continued to give away the M&Ms, but they put them in an opaque container. Now, everybody knew what was in the container. That was your M&Ms. But what they found is that people snacked much less when they just didn't see it every time they walked past the snack container. And one of the things they also did, which I thought was interesting, is that they only offered the M&Ms in one color at a time, because some studies have shown that people will take a bigger scoop when it's a multicolored, because even though they all taste the same, there's that feeling of more diversity of choice when you have a variety. And so by limiting the variety, people just take a little bit less. Some of the other things they did is that they found that when people went to get a cup of coffee, they would wander over to the snack container while their coffee was brewing, and then they would get some snacks. And so instead of having the snack table 6 feet away, they moved it 17 feet away, and surprise, surprise, snacking dramatically declined because it was just a little bit too far to walk while your coffee was brewing. People didn't want to leave their coffee, so they stayed there. And so all sorts of things. In the line for the buffet, they changed the order of food so that the most nutritious food was first and that the snacks were less. They offered fewer options for desserts, and so people wouldn't grab 3 or 4. There was one that rotated every day. So that all these things that they were doing, they took, they did 10 years of research within just a couple of years. And of course, they did what Google does best, which is to crunch the data. And then they were reusing that data in order to make healthier and healthier choices. And again, it wasn't about denying choice to anybody. It was about helping to nudge people to, make their best choice for themselves. So I'm going to take a quick moment here. Did writing the book change how you ate, or what you eat, or where you eat? Great question. In many ways, I was on this journey as I was writing the book. So I was already thinking, years before when I went to that to the Cheesecake Factory to eat, this was long before I had started the book. So I was already thinking about, portion size and how do we communicate all of this. So the book actually helped me to pull together a lot of the things that I've been thinking about for a very long time. I've been very focused on vegetables. How can I make the vegetables tastier so that I eat more of them? And this is one of the things Google ran into as well. They actually sponsored a 72-hour training course with the Culinary Institute of America to teach chefs to make vegetables amazing. Because if you've ever worked in a high-end restaurant, doing the vegetables is for the worst chefs, and then you eventually work your way up to doing the meat. And so part of what they wanted is to give that same sort of care and attention to the vegetables so they can, take a bigger place on the dinner plate. As you know, 9 out of 10 Americans don't eat, the recommended servings of fruits and vegetables. And so if we can make people enjoy it, they will simply eat more of it. If you eat more of the healthy food, you will just naturally eat less of the unhealthy food. And so a lot of those things work together. Ideas that made it into the book with my family. I have my wife and 2 kids. We would go out to eat all the time, and we would only ever order 3 meals for the 4 of us. And what we found is that, one, it was always enough, and we often still had a little bit of food to take home, but it always left room for dessert. And so it was actually great for us. So instead of taking a huge amount of food home where everybody had a little bit of food and nothing really matched, we ended up eating most of the food, having a really great experience, and we weren't stuck with sort of leftovers that weren't really enough for a meal. And so let me take a quick look. How do you get the book? The book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstore, any place you would normally get books online, you will find it. I encourage you to take a look. If you enjoy it, leave a review. If you don't enjoy it, leave a review. That will help other people as well. Keep in mind that the book is really written for sort of a lay audience, people who don't think about this every day. It's really to motivate them to appreciate the role that their psychology and our environment are playing in influencing the decisions we make. So in many ways, it's sort of a tool for dietitians to use with people that they're talking to help them appreciate probably some of the advice that you're already giving them. Let's see. It is available as an audiobook as well, so on Audible, and so you can definitely get it there as well. And let's see, I want to make sure I haven't missed any questions as we come to the half hour. So in the book, I see the question about Brian Wansink, and I didn't end up including any of the research from Brian Wansink simply because some of the work had been retracted, and I didn't know what the impact would be in the future. So I did avoid his specific research in the book. Let's see. So I didn't discuss the fact that it was retracted, but I did avoid using it just because I didn't want people to be using information that then they later found out had been retracted, and might make people less confident in the research that they were sharing. And so, somebody says about nudging, and of course the book Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein was very influential in my thinking. And, the book in many ways is an application of nudge theory to the food world. I think we're really just at the beginning of appreciating the power of behavioral science to influence people in a positive way without taking away choice. And, for me, that's a lot of it. People don't like to be told what to do, and you can actually create resistance to what you're trying to accomplish if you try to force people to do things. And so I would much rather encourage people and create a food environment which people are just healthier by default. Again, when I think, I'm a futurist, a food futurist, and when I think about what would be the ideal food future for me, in 20 years, I don't want everybody to be counting calories. I want our food environment to be redesigned in a way that we're walking more, where we have more of a sense of community, we have a sense of purpose in our jobs, all of the things that together lead to healthier outcomes. and as well as the sense of community of eating food and other things. And so it's really about our food environment, which would then shift our psychology, and all of those things would begin to nudge us every day to have a healthier outcome. So I think we're almost at our time. If there are any last minute questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you have questions you don't want to ask here, but you'd like to ask me, I hope that you will email me and we can continue this conversation. Other places you can find me, my website is futurityfood.com. I've already mentioned, though, the LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. Twitter is a great place to have conversations. And I'm just trying to get going here on Instagram, so if you follow me again, I will follow you back. I'm probably not, I don't have much of a following there, so it's not going to impress anybody. And so, let's see. Thank you to everybody who is tuned in today. I think we are just about at the end of our time. It's really been great talking to you. You're such an important audience, and I hope that one of the things that we gain from a book like this is just how important dietitians are. Right now people are looking for information from their friends and their family and doctors and others who may not be trained in this. And so part of it is just understanding, who should we be turning to for this kind of information. And in the book I do talk about some of the reasons why people will go back and listen to friends even when the advice doesn't tend to work out, or talk about why we tend to keep following the next new fad diet even though the last fad diet didn't work for us. And so if people tend to think that they're the problem when they can't follow a diet, and if nobody can follow a diet, then it's probably the diet's fault, not ours. And so again, understanding how our minds and environment are really leading a lot of our bad choices, and not undermining individuals for those outcomes. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's listened in, and I look forward to continuing this conversation offline. I will give you back the rest of your day, and also have a great weekend. Thanks. Bye.